When I saw him for the first time, I didn't know it would be the last time I would look at Ryan with love. We were standing at the threshold of change, both too young and naive to realize that love and lies are two sides of the same coin, and that the game we were playing wouldn't end until it tore us apart. He was my ideal, my anchor, but over time I came to realize that I was really just a pawn in his meticulous and sophisticated plan, which, as it turned out, had started much earlier than I could have imagined. The lie I had taken for truth was his weapon, and now, standing on the edge of the breakup, having unleashed the full truth, I understand. It wasn't a coincidence, it was part of a great game. And now, with everything destroyed, the only question left is, can you survive after seeing that love was nothing but a deception? I'm Eleanor, and right now I'm sitting in my car, like some low-budget private detective, wondering if I've completely lost my mind. My husband Ryan told me he had a business conference in Chicago. That's what was written in the calendar, confirmed by his secretary, and stated in the hotel reservation. But here I am, parked across from a church in Boston, because some stranger decided to play either my guardian angel or devil. I haven't yet decided which one to choose. This is madness. I whispered to myself, but I was already reaching for my sunglasses, as if they could shield me from reality. The church bells began their mournful toll, cold as steel, making my heart tighten. I slipped out of the car. The heels clicked on the wet sidewalk, their rhythm felt like an ominous omen. Every step seemed to bring me closer to my own execution. I slipped through the side door, trying to stay unnoticed, and found a spot behind a massive marble pillar. The smell of incense and lies hit me like a wave, and for a moment, I was transported back in time. My wedding day. 7 years ago. The same church, the same scent, the same heavy feeling of something inevitable. I saw myself in memory, dressed in white, nervously clutching the bouquet, heart stopping in anticipation as the organ began to play. There he was, Ryan, standing at the altar in a perfectly tailored tuxedo I had never seen before, hands folded before him, his jaw twitching with that familiar nervous tick. He was looking at me, and I at him, and all I felt was pure, endless happiness. But today, I stood here, hidden behind the pillar, feeling how that familiar script came crashing down on me with new, crushing force. The bride appeared at the entrance, and the ground seemed to vanish beneath me. Long dark hair, olive skin, graceful steps that I would recognize anywhere. Megan. My best friend since 3rd grade. The woman who helped me choose my wedding dress, sat with me in my hardest moments, was part of my life, my family. And here she was, walking towards the altar, towards Ryan. The priest's words dissolved into white noise, as though my ears refused to hear them. I watched them exchange vows. Ryan repeated the same words he had once said to me. Promises to love each other until death do them part. Promises Megan and I had made to each other as children, no secrets, no lies. Friends forever. I don't remember how I left the church. I don't remember how I drove home. But I remember the moment when I sat at our kitchen table. Our perfect kitchen, built by Ryan last year. He insisted on the renovation, saying we deserved the best. I gazed at the sunset through the huge windows, which suddenly seemed like bars, locking me in the cage of my life. My phone buzzed on the table. A message from Ryan, the conference is running late. Don't wait up for me, go to bed. I poured myself a glass of his favorite Scotch whiskey, the one he reserved for special occasions. The burning liquid slid down my throat, leaving a bitter aftertaste. I welcomed the pain. It was real, unlike everything else in my life. Another message. This time from an unknown number, now you know. What will you do about it? I laughed, and the sound of my laughter echoed sharply, like broken glass. I opened my laptop and began typing. My fingers moved across the keys almost automatically, as if the words had been waiting to come out, hiding somewhere in the dark corners of my soul. Dear Laura, I hope this letter finds you in good health. Each letter appeared on the screen with mechanical precision, as though the sound of my inner voice was taking physical form. I couldn't stop, as if an invisible hand was guiding my hands. Laura, Megan's younger sister, had never been close to me, but her name came to mind. Perhaps because she was always the one trying to unite the family, dreaming of something that would never be. Now I think that betrayal is not just deception, it's a complicated dance of lies, where each step is measured, every move aimed at one goal, hiding the truth. Ryan, my charming Ryan, had always been a skilled dancer. His false smiles, perfected to perfection, and casual touches, which, as I now understand, never meant anything. But in this dance, it turns out I was also a participant, though I didn't know it. And now I have no choice but to follow the melody he chose, but change its ending. I take another sip of scotch. The bitter, burning taste heightens my perception. I smile at myself in the reflection of the dark laptop screen. Let them have their honeymoon, I think. Let them enjoy their victory. I have something they don't, their trust. That's my trump card. The sun had completely disappeared behind the horizon, plunging me into darkness. But for the first time in a long while, I feel like I can see everything clearly. Before me lies an old photo album. It feels heavy, as though its pages have absorbed not only memories but the weight of all these years. On my lap, it reminds me of the Eleanor I used to be. On one of the first pages is a photograph of Ryan, Megan, and me laughing, stretched out on the lawn. We're 16, and the whole world seems open to us. Ryan has his arms around both of us, and I can see in his eyes something I couldn't understand back then. The edges of the photo are worn, just like the memories of that time. I flinch at the sound of footsteps coming from downstairs. They echo in my mind, like the ricochet of pain. It's Ryan. He's been home for 3 days since the wedding, as if nothing happened, as if all the shattered illusions can be swept under the rug. I close the album, but it falls to the floor with a dull thud as Ryan enters the bedroom. He's carrying 2 plates of food, which I certainly won't touch. The words slip from my lips before I can stop them. Doesn't this feel like a movie you've seen before? Only this time, there's a different actress. He stops, his gaze freezing for a moment, as if trying to process my statement. The chopsticks freeze in his hand. Then he sets the plate down and takes a step toward me with that same concerned look I've seen countless times before. "You've been drinking," he says, his voice filling the room with cold insincerity. I laugh. The sound cuts through the air like broken glass. It feels strange, even to me, as if it belongs to someone else. Is this your next move? Gaslighting your wife? Do you really think it'll work? I step back, not letting him come any closer. Eleanor, I'm worried about you. His hand reaches for mine, but I step back even further. When did it start? Before our wedding? During it? Was I your backup plan, or just a cover? My voice vibrates, as if all my pain has concentrated in it. He turns away, but I catch a glimpse of his left hand twitching. That nervous tick, his weakness. I spent 7 years studying his rhythms, tracking how he lies. You're talking nonsense, he says, but his words are empty, like an echo. I was at St. Mary's Church on Tuesday, I finally say, slowly and clearly. Those words hang in the air, like a heavy fog, filling the space between us. And by the way, her dress is better than the one I wore on our wedding day. He freezes, his gaze blank, and I feel cold fury spreading through my veins. The mask slips for just a moment, but it's enough to see the cold, calculating look in his eyes. This is the real Ryan. The one I never allowed myself to see, not because I couldn't, but because I didn't want to. His face tightens, his fingers clenching into a fist. This isn't what you think, he says. My voice isn't shaking, I reply. And I'm proud of that. Don't insult me with excuses. I saw it with my own eyes. You married my best friend while I was home playing the role of your perfect wife. What do you think I'm supposed to think? He runs a hand through his hair, the other hand falling uselessly to his side. It's complicated, Eleanor. There are things you don't understand. Things I don't understand. My words cut through the air like a knife. Like joint bank accounts, the property you bought together. Or maybe the fact that your mother knew all this time. His gaze flickers, but he says nothing. His silence is the loudest confession of all. Do you really think I'm an idiot? I hiss. You think I didn't know? I turn to the dresser, open a drawer, and pull out a stack of documents. They pile in my hands, like a physical manifestation of all the betrayals. 3 days, Ryan. 3 days to change the passwords. Do you really think our wedding anniversary is a reliable defense? Though, I guess it doesn't matter now. Eleanor, please, his voice becomes urgent, but I see the panic flicker in his eyes. Please. I scoff. Are we going to talk this over? You're going to explain everything to me? Just like you explained your business trip to Chicago? I throw the documents on the bed. Bank statements, property contracts, emails. They scatter like shards of broken glass, each one carrying a piece of the truth. Or maybe we can discuss the trust fund Laura set up for your future children with Megan. His face pales. He steps toward me, but I step back. You had no right, he says, his voice cracking. I had every right. I shout. The cry bursts from my chest like an animal's roar. I'm your wife, Ryan. I was your friend. We grew up together, the 3 of us. And you. My words trail off. I breathe heavily, looking at him as if I'm seeing him for the first time. Maybe I am. Maybe I never knew him. Maybe I never knew myself. Leave, my voice sounds steady, unexpectedly so. This is my house too. But there's no longer any space for you here. I take the last document from the stack, the power of attorney he signed a year ago. Back then, he was too busy to bother with the details. You should have read what you were signing, Ryan. Now leave. Or should I call Michael and ask him to escort you out? He doesn't leave out of fear. He leaves because he knows this is just the beginning. He knows me well enough to understand, I won't stop. When the door slams, I collapse onto the floor and pick up the photo album. I run my fingers over the faces of the people we once were. We looked so happy, so innocent, so perfect. But we were all lying. The cafe where Megan and I used to share secrets seems smaller. Or maybe it's me who has changed. My figure feels like it's pressing against the walls, the air feels heavy. Megan is sitting across from me. Her wedding ring, a twin of mine, gleams on her finger, and it makes my coffee taste bitter. I didn't think you'd come, she says, nervously running her fingers along the edge of her cup. The latte in front of her remains untouched. Funny, I smile, but I can't hide the steel in my voice. I didn't think you'd marry my husband. Her face pales. She flinches, and for a moment I see her carefully constructed facade crack. Eleanor. Did you know about the trust fund? I pull out the bank statements and lay them on the table between us, like cards in a rigged game. Laura has made excellent preparations for the arrival of your children. Her hands tremble as she tries to speak. Her face is pale, but not from guilt, rather from anger. I watch her reaction like I'm watching a performance, and I can't help but notice her hands shaking slightly as she picks up the documents. What trust fund? Her voice is filled with confusion, but there's already a spark of fury in her eyes. Is this a joke? Not at all, I reply calmly, enjoying her bewilderment. $3 million. Laura insists it's being saved for the grandchildren. Although, maybe she's just tired of waiting for you and Ryan to start making them fast enough. Megan throws the papers on the table as if they are contaminated. She looks like she's been knocked off balance for the first time in a long time. Ryan said our marriage was just a formality for the inheritance, she finally spits out. He said. What did he say? I interrupt, my voice sharper than I intended. That he loved you? That I was cold and obsessed with my career? That's what he told his mother last month. Her eyes flash, and I realize I've hit the mark. How do you know that? She asks quietly, her voice trembling like a taut string. Because I spent the last week finding out just how thoroughly our husband played both of us, I say with deliberate calm, knowing it will affect her even more than shouting. The waiter approaches, but we both simultaneously wave him off without looking at him. The atmosphere between us is reaching its boiling point. I continue. I've got something interesting. Want to hear it? I pull out my phone and play the recording, where Ryan's voice talks about joint investments with Laura, discussing how they can use her family's real estate connections. I glance up to see her face change. Her eyes widen as she hears the voice of her mother, Grace, the woman who owns one of the largest real estate firms in Boston. Did he ever ask you out? I ask, never breaking my gaze from her face. Did you ever wonder why he chose us? Her lips press into a thin line, but she remains silent. Two best friends. The ones who would never betray each other. Perfect cover, right? The perfect stop story. Megan stands abruptly, her chair scraping loudly across the floor. You're just trying to hurt me because I hurt you. Her voice breaks out. I get it. I deserve it. But you can't. Sit down. My voice doesn't falter. It sounds firm, like it's made of steel. You haven't heard the best part yet. She hesitates but sits back down. Shock, confusion, and maybe even fear are written all over her face. I place another document in front of her. Remember that summer internship Ryan helped you get? I continue, fueling the fire of her bewilderment. At Grace's firm, where your mother finally convinced herself he was the great guy? Her face scrunches as she sees the date of the transfer of one of her mother's main real estate assets. I can see her lips part slightly. That's my mother's signature, she finally says. But she would never have sold that property for such a price. She would never. She didn't know what she was doing, I finish for her. Because she trusted you. She trusted you to certify those documents while you thought it was just practice for your license, while you were planning your wedding. Her hands tremble again as she takes the paper. Horror deepens on her face as she recognizes her own handwriting. You helped him steal from his own mother. My words scorched the air between us like a hot knife. The truth is better, isn't it? She looks at me with an indescribable expression, and I see the last remnants of her illusions crumble inside her. He played us both, Megan, I add. The only difference is I figured it out before he could take everything. Finally, she looks at me. Really looks at me. For the first time in all this time. What are you going to do? Her voice is broken, almost a whisper. I stand up, gathering the documents. My movements are confident, precise, almost theatrical. Wrong question, I say, leaning toward her. The real question is, what are we going to do? You have two options. Keep playing by his rules and lose everything, or help me destroy him. I pull out the last document, a small USB drive, seemingly insignificant in size, but containing devastating data. Everything is here: thefts, schemes, connections, dirty tricks, compromising evidence. Her mother's companies, my own savings, Laura's reputation. It's all tangled into one knot of intrigue and lies that Ryan packaged so carefully, hoping we would never compare our versions. Megan looks at the drive as though it might bite her. Her hands shake, as though the very fact that the truth is now before her is a crushing blow. If this gets out, she whispers, everything will burn. I place my hand over hers. My gaze is fixed directly into her eyes. We both wear the same wedding rings, but this time, we will be the ones holding the matches. She grips the drive in her fingers, and I catch a glimpse of the Megan I once knew. Fierce, loyal, unstoppable. We sit in silence for a few seconds, but in that silence, there's more understanding than in any of our previous arguments. When do we start? She asks softly, and I smile for the first time in weeks. This time, my smile feels real. On the kitchen table, which was once our wedding gift from Laura, scattered documents from Ryan's office lie. Empty wine bottles, vainly decorating the countertop, mockingly remind us that today is unlike any other. I'm tired of wine, but it has somehow become a symbol of this strange night filled with chaos and devastating revelations. My phone vibrates on the edge of the table. The screen displays a message from Ryan. Please, let's talk. This can be solved rationally. Rationally. A word he loved to use as though it could erase all traces of his lies. My finger hovers over the delete button. The phone vibrates again. This time, it's Megan's name. Grace is asking questions. Her text is short, anxious. We need to move faster. I place the phone face down, but my thoughts are already swirling. The scale of what we're about to do is starting to fully sink in. This is not just about exposing Ryan. This is about destroying families, reputations, lives. I freeze for a moment, feeling the fog of doubt wash over me. A knock at the door pulls me from my thoughts. I'm about to ignore it, but the sound of a key turning in the lock makes me freeze. Only one person, besides Ryan, has that key. The door opens, and Michael steps into the dining room. His gaze sweeps over the chaos that's unfolded on the table: papers, bottles, my tired and wary expression. "When was the last time you slept?" he asks, sitting down on the nearest chair. I wave my hand vaguely toward the table. "Did you know Ryan's father committed suicide?" I ask, tossing a newspaper clipping I found deep in Laura's financial archives onto the table. Michael tenses, his usual calm face losing its composure. "That was 10 years ago, right after Ryan graduated from law school." I speak quickly, almost stumbling over my words. Officially, it was a hunting accident. Unofficially. I slide a stack of bank statements toward him. He found out that Laura and Ryan were embezzling from his company. For years. They've been stealing from him for years. Michael slumps into the chair as though he's lost his footing. "Does anyone else know?" I point to a burner phone on the table. "The person who has been sending me anonymous tips. Today, he sent me this." I show him the copies of William Mitchell's suicide note. "He tried to stop them, Michael. He tried to expose them. And they..." My voice cracks. Michael reaches for my hand, but I pull away. "They killed him." The words fall heavily into the silence, like the strike of a hammer. "Eleanor," Michael's voice is firm. "You're not becoming one of them. You're protecting people. Grace, Megan, the employees of her company. You're protecting the future." I jump to my feet, pacing back and forth across the room. Or am I just so focused on destroying Ryan that I don't care who gets caught in the crossfire? I whisper, but the words come out louder than I expected. Because right now, I'm planning an expose at a family reunion, knowing it will ruin the lives of people who have nothing to do with it. Michael remains silent, and his silence speaks louder than words. Ryan's sister's kids will lose their college funds. Grace's employees might lose their jobs. I speak quickly, distractedly, as if I'm trying to justify my doubts. And all this to prove a truth that's already destroying everything it touches. I stop and meet Michael's gaze. "So tell me, Michael," I whisper. "Is it worth it?" I grab one of the wine bottles, not noticing it's empty. The cold glass burns my fingers like a reminder that there's emptiness inside me now, too. William Mitchell died trying to do the right thing. And here I stand, constructing elaborate revenge scenarios, like a villain from a cheap comic book. The image makes me smirk, bitterly, almost sarcastically. Michael stays silent for a long time. His gaze is dark and focused, then he stands and gently takes the bottle from my hands. "Do you want to know the difference between you and them?" he asks, and I avert my eyes. But Michael doesn't stop. His voice grows slightly louder. "You're standing here, at 3 in the morning, agonizing over the moral consequences of your actions. And them? They're probably sleeping peacefully, counting their money and planning their next scam." "It doesn't make it right," I whisper, staring at the table littered with papers. "No, it doesn't," he agrees. "But it means you have a choice." He starts gathering the scattered papers, methodically arranging them into neat piles. The action calms me, as though it's showing me that chaos can be tamed. You can dramatically expose them at the family meeting, like you planned, he continues. Or we can do it the right way. Legally carefully. He picks up the copy of William Mitchell's suicide note, his gaze hardening. We'll finish what Ryan's father started. But first, we'll protect the innocent. At that moment, the burner phone on the edge of the table begins to vibrate. Another message from the anonymous source. Ask Laura about the offshore accounts. I look at the screen, then shift my gaze to the table, where 7 years of marriage, a lifetime of friendship, and generations of lies are laid out before me. It all leads to this moment. Okay, I finally say, and my voice sounds unexpectedly confident. Show me how to do it the right way. Michael nods and pulls out his phone. First, we need to talk to someone who specializes in financial fraud, he says. I know a guy. Wait. I grab his arm, stopping him. Before we do this, I need to know something. Are you helping me because I'm right? Or because I'm your sister? Michael looks at me as if weighing his words, but then he speaks with certainty. Neither. I'm helping you because someone has to stop them. And you're strong enough to do it without becoming one of them. His words stick in my mind. I look at the empty wine bottles, the papers that testify to how close I've come to their world of manipulation and revenge. Maybe he's right. Maybe there's a better way. We meet James Harrison in his spacious office, which smells of leather and old wood. Documents from his folders are scattered across the polished mahogany desk, like maps on a battlefield. Laura Mitchell's financial network spans at least 3 generations of both families, Harrison says, smoothing a sheet of paper with the same methodical precision that Michael used to organize my documents. My hands tremble as I pick up one of the papers. How many people will this affect? I ask, but my voice sounds so detached, as though I'm watching myself from the outside. Harrison sighs and shrugs. Directly? About 30 people. Indirectly? He pauses, thinking. We're talking about dismantling a scheme that's been going on for decades. Before me lies a list of names of children, most of them beneficiaries of trusts that will collapse if we proceed with our plan. Their future literally hangs by a thread, woven with Laura's greed and Ryan's ambitions. Offshore accounts are just the beginning, Harrison says. His voice is calm, but in his eyes, I see the same understanding as Michael's. This is more than just an expose. This is war, and the innocent will suffer. My thoughts get stuck on this list. I feel the weight of each name, as though I'm holding stones in my hands. These are their lives, their future. So, everything goes to the ground, I say quietly but firmly. Michael looks at me, and his gaze says more than words. He believes in me, even when I doubt myself. If we do this, I say, lifting my eyes, it won't be for revenge. We'll do it for them. Michael slowly nods, and his confidence transfers to me, like a warm current cutting through the cold of doubt. Harrison gathers the documents, carefully placing them in folders, as if trying to keep chaos under control. Then let's start small, he says, his voice steady, professional. Laura has accounts in several offshore locations. If we crack open even one of them, the rest will start to unravel on its own. She's tied too many knots, too many threads. We pull one, and the whole network will tear apart. I look at the list of names before me. It feels like a heavy burden pressing down on my shoulders, forcing me to think about all those who might lose something important. Children, families, employees. Their lives should not become collateral damage in my war. It sounds too simple, I say, doubting my own words. What if she's already prepared for this? What if she has a plan in case someone starts digging? Harrison leans back in his chair, his face becoming serious. Laura always has a plan. She's smart. But she's not invincible. Her weakness is that she's used to winning. People who've never known defeat are rarely ready for a real threat. Michael shifts his gaze from him to me. His eyes are searching for the answer, the one I know he wants to hear. The answer that has to come from me. We'll do it, I say at last. But we'll do it the right way. Without destroying innocent lives. I rise, gathering the documents and bringing my thoughts into order. A plan is forming in my head. Not destruction for the sake of revenge, but a precise strike that will expose them and use their own schemes against them. Laura and Ryan didn't just use people, they tangled their actions in such a way that even their victory now is an illusion. Harrison, I address him, feeling the firmness in my voice. What can we do first? He looks up, his face brightening with a faint smile. First, we'll talk to the banks. And maybe give Laura a little surprise. Michael smirks and shakes his head, as if not believing what he's hearing. But I know he believes in me. We both understand that this step is just the beginning of a long journey. At home, in the stillness of the night, I look at the list of names again. Each beneficiary is a separate story, a life, a fate. It feels like I'm carrying them on my shoulders, as though I'm trying to protect them from the storm I've unleashed. The phone vibrates on the table. The screen displays another message from the anonymous source. They know you're digging. Be careful. I close my eyes, feeling fear creeping in, trying to take control. But I won't let it. For the first time in a long while, I feel alive, as if something more than just a thirst for justice is awakening within me. This isn't just my battle. It's a battle for all those they left behind, for those who were too small or too trusting to understand what was being done to them. I grab a sheet of paper and a pen. I write the names down. One after the other. Each person who might be hurt becomes a personal reminder to me that I'm not doing this for revenge. I'm doing it for them. Then I put the paper away in the desk drawer, ready to start again in the morning. Because no matter how much I want to burn everything to the ground, I won't allow myself to act in anger anymore. Now I play by my own rules. The ripple effect we're about to create could touch hundreds of people, and I know the consequences will be inevitable. Michael leans forward, his eyes focused, but there's not a hint of doubt in his words. We can easily prove the fraud, he says, his voice firm, resolute. The question is, should we? James taps the list of names, his finger sliding over the lines, and I see his eyes pinpointing the key details. Some of these trust funds support healthcare and education, he says, as if trying to justify it. He knows this information is important, but I'm not ready to hear it. Stop. I abruptly rise and walk to the window. From this office, the panorama of Boston stretches out, a city that seems so stable and confident, yet so fragile at the same time. A thought flashes through my mind. We're like thieves, ready to blow up something so massive it's almost unimaginable. We're on the brink of catastrophe, but I can't allow myself to break. I have to keep a cool head. My phone vibrates in my pocket. It's a message from Megan. She's found the documents about the missing assets. It seems she still doesn't realize what she's done, and she's actually going to call Laura. I can feel the adrenaline start to surge in my veins. Megan Grace is calling Laura, I say, looking up at James and Michael. Time's up. We're running. Michael, without looking up from the papers, continues analyzing the situation, but his face remains as unreadable as ever. If Grace directly confronts Laura, it will all fall apart. His voice is even, but there's an undercurrent of concern. And you know what that means. We can't let that happen. I turn to James. My gaze cuts through him, forcing me to ask the question I've been postponing. How long will it take to secure the innocent? My words are quiet, but laced with tension. He sighs, tossing the papers onto the table. Weeks, maybe months, he answers, not hiding the weight of his response. We'll need all our resources to ensure their safety, which means we can't afford to make a mistake. The dark office, which had once seemed like nothing more than an arsenal for precise, cold maneuvers, suddenly fills with unease. My gaze slides back to the window, where Boston continues to pulse in its normal rhythm. But I know that, at this moment, its calm is an illusion. Laura appears in the doorway of the office. I see her even before she takes her first step into the room, and despite everything I know about her game, I feel her presence filling the space with authority. Her confident stride, her perfectly tailored suit, her squared shoulders. This isn't just Laura Mitchell, this is the very threat we all fear. She stands there like a figure ready to disrupt our game, but I don't let myself give in. We can't let her be the one who dictates the terms. Find out what she wants, Michael's voice cuts through the silence, and I realize this isn't just advice. It's an order. He stands by the window, watching as the city darkens, as every minute slips away from us like sand through our fingers. The room grows heavy with inevitability. Megan, Laura's daughter, is somewhere in the shadows, like the rest of us, watching another family fall apart. She can't just be a bystander. She'll be part of this fall, one way or another. Or she'll pull out the envelope, and we'll discuss alternatives. What if she holds the key to the solution? What if she's the link that turns everything around? Michael starts to say something, but I don't listen. My eyes drift over the paper, the list of names, the numbers that now mean too much. Alternatives, yes, they can be found, but they're unlikely to be as sweet as I once imagined. But my voice remains steady, though a storm brews inside me. My heart is pounding so hard I feel its beat in every part of my body, as if it wants to break free. The gap between what I want and what I need is so vast that I can barely hold myself back from screaming. A generous settlement, an agreement where the guilty party stays protected, it seems too good to be true. But what am I willing to give in return? Am I truly ready to part with a piece of my soul just to see how it ends? Laura places the envelope on James's desk, her hands gripping it like a snake ready to strike. Everyone wins, except the judge. He can't win this game. Michael snaps his fingers, and we all feel the tension in the air increase. You won't get rid of this, he says, his voice now hoarse and low, like the dull thud of a hammer. Laura laughs, but it's not a joyful sound. It's something dark, hidden beneath layers of lies and manipulation. Eleanor, what do you really want? Justice or peace? Her eyes gleam, and there's no trace of the woman I once knew in them. Only cunning and cold logic. My phone continues to vibrate in my pocket. It's Megan. She seems determined to remind me that time is running out. I answer her call, listening to her trembling voice. She clings to what her mother never felt, an uncontrollable fear, the helplessness that comes when all the secrets are laid bare. The list of names, those who remain outside the game, those whose lives have already been shattered. How much time do I have left to make a decision? These words taste like surrender. As long as Grace hasn't finished reading these documents, it can still be fixed. We can still stop and find a way out. But if I stop now, if I don't go through with it, everything will be lost for good. Laura approaches the door and looks back. Her gaze is as cold as ice, and she looks at me as if I were an adversary. Choose wisely, Eleanor. Unlike William, you still have a choice. Her words sound like a threat, but I don't allow myself to flinch. She leaves, and the room grows quieter. The office feels empty, even though we're all still here. The shadow of her departing figure feels unbearably heavy, and I realize the game has entered its final stage. Megan, Laura, Michael, James, they're all pieces on the board. But who am I in this game? I catch the moment when he realizes something is wrong. It's a fleeting shadow on his face, a barely noticeable shift in his expression, but enough for me to understand. He sensed it. Sensed that something has gone off plan. And if I hadn't been paying attention, I might have missed it, but now I know. He's already one step ahead. But then her voice cuts through the murmur of conversations, loud and almost commanding, as always. Laura doesn't waste time. She's tired, but her strength still holds. She knows all eyes are on her, and she will use it, as always. Please, everyone gather in the main hall. Her words are like a command, and the crowd starts to move, pulling us along. I, like everyone else, comply. And soon we're in the hall, surrounded by familiar faces, which now seem to have become part of the wall that's collapsing around me. Megan stands next to Grace. Grace is pale but composed, her gaze fixed somewhere in the distance, as if she's already on the other side of this rift, where something can still be fixed. Laura, her eyes empty, but full of the certainty that everything is under control. Laura's second husband, ignoring everything going on, shines against the overall shadow, as if he's incapable of grasping the gravity of the moment. I notice Ryan's sister. She's clutching her children's hands. Children, God, children. I freeze for a moment, thinking about how easily the lives of these little beings, who never chose this world, can be shattered. My heart grows heavy, but I can't afford to waver. Laura raises her glass, and her voice fills the hall. She says, "Thank you all for coming." And suddenly, I realize, it's all an illusion. This is all a theatrical performance, where only she and her ambitions matter. The whole hall, all these people, are like puppets she keeps on strings. But I take a step forward. My voice cuts through the sudden silence, and perhaps this is the moment when everything changes. I want to say something important. Something that could tear the mask off her face. But before I can say a word, Ryan walks into the hall. He comes up to me, his eyes full of questions, full of pain. He wants to say something, he's ready to explain. But Michael, as always, blocks his way. He steps in front of Ryan like a barricade, and I know this isn't a coincidence. Michael has planned everything, he's always one step ahead. Ryan falls silent, but I can see the doubt in his eyes. He understands that something has changed, that I'm no longer the person I used to be. But what can he do now, when everything has already gone too far? Megan stands next to Grace. I see her look at me, her gaze full of questions, perhaps even fear. I don't know what she's thinking, but I know one thing, her presence here means something more. She could become an important part of what happens next. Laura looks at me, her eyes cold and sharp as a blade. She doesn't hide her intentions. And yet, her voice carries a warning. "Eleanor, think carefully about what you're doing." Her words are like a stone dropping into water, creating ripples, but I can't allow myself to back down. This has been too carefully planned for me to let her win. I pull out the envelope she gave me. It's still sealed, and I stare at its surface for a long time. I thought about this for weeks, weighing every possible consequence, every step. My fingers touch the envelope, its weight feels like the weight of the decision I'm about to make. This isn't just a document, this is my freedom. This is the moment when everything will either happen or nothing will. With this envelope in my hands, I understand, if I don't make a decision now, if I don't act, everything will fall apart. My gaze meets Laura's, and I know she's waiting. Waiting for me to show her my weakness. But I can't. I can't allow her to win. The police lights cast alternating red and blue hues on Laura's immaculate kitchen, creating a strange, almost surreal contrast with her calm, motionless face. This light seeps into every crack, reflecting off smooth surfaces, like the shadows of the past I can't forget. Laura sits across from me at the Marble Island restaurant, as if she's oblivious to all this horror. We're both soaked from the sprinklers, and time seems to have stopped. We watch as officers hand out cards, as boxes of evidence rise into the air like verdicts. Real evidence, not the deceptive files she showed me a month ago, when everything still seemed controlled, safe. I quietly say, barely holding back a smile. Everything in this portfolio is a copy. The originals were sent to the FBI an hour ago. Her perfectly manicured nails tap against her coffee cup, the sound eerily reminiscent of the rhythm of a hostile dance, one in which she has always been a flawless partner. In her eyes, there is no fear, only a cold, almost academic curiosity as she looks at me. "You chose this moment deliberately," she says, her voice devoid of any emotion. "A party, a family gathering, like father, like daughter-in-law. This was all part of the plan, wasn't it?" I smile, but I don't answer. I'm not going to justify myself. My resolve is stronger than ever. In my hands is the entire story. And this story will not end the way she imagined. I slide William's real suicide note across the counter, his handwriting, his last words, which may never reach her. He had planned to reveal everything at your anniversary party, hadn't he? In that phrase was all his hatred, his plan. But everything changed, as life always does, when it can't follow the script written in advance. Before the hunting accident, the drumming stops. I feel her gaze freeze on the document, her body tense as she tries to understand how badly she miscalculated when she thought she still had her finger on the pulse. Meanwhile, I see Ryan being led to the police car, his hands behind his back, his eyes dull. He had been so sure of himself, of his position, that he never expected to see this moment. Never expected that I would be ready to destroy his world in an instant, bringing down everything hidden beneath the surface of his perfectly constructed life. How painful it is to realize. He had always been the one who thought he could manipulate me, like a puppet, controlling every step, every glance. But here I am, with this bundle of evidence in my hands, and now his carefully built world is crumbling. We all played this game. She had always been the embodiment of perfection, Laura. She never wavered, never doubted, never showed weakness. But I know that, in this moment, her confidence has cracked. Maybe she doesn't believe this could be the end. She believes something can still be done, that something can still be turned in her favor. But whatever she does, she has already lost. All her life, all these years, all the time she spent manipulating, deceiving, scheming, it all vanishes like smoke. And now I look at her, but I no longer see the woman I once knew. She's just a piece in the game I've won. Ryan, with his empty eyes, says nothing. He was the one who was sure he could control everything. But not this time. This isn't just the end of his reign. This is the end of our game. I pull out my phone one last time, as the silence between us grows too thick, too heavy to breathe. I scroll through the chain of messages from an unknown number, the ones that came after his death. 4 letters, 3 calls, a note I was supposed to find. Words written in advance, planned for years ahead, like that very last step William knew he would take, knowing he might not survive the attempt to reveal the truth. He left breadcrumbs for those brave enough to follow them. And here I am, with the phone in my hand, showing her that none of this was an accident. This isn't a mistake, I say calmly, but with certainty. He knew he was going to die. But he left all these messages for us. For you, Laura. And here you are. I meet her eyes, and I see her face lose its color, as she tries to hide her fear, but I can see it. She's starting to realize that her game is over, that there's no way to avoid her downfall. I wasn't your first victim, Laura, I continue, looking into her lifeless eyes. But I will be your last. Her mouth tightens into a thin line, and she's about to say something, but her words no longer matter. In this moment, she understands that her world is collapsing, and I will be the one to crush it completely. The officers approach, ready to escort her through the door that will soon become her prison. I watch as they lead her out, as she passes by me, that last time when she tries to maintain some semblance of control, though she's long since lost all power. I see Ryan standing in the corner of the room, his eyes finally filling with what I've been waiting for. He understands. He can't hide anymore, he can't pretend that any of this was normal. Everything he tried to prove to himself comes crashing down in an instant. And in this moment, as I look at him, I realize that this isn't my betrayal, it isn't my revenge. This was all his choice. He chose Laura, he chose the lie. And now he'll have to understand that this time, I won't save him. Grace appears next to him, and I see her take out a photograph. There is pain in her eyes, but something else as well, relief. She holds the photograph, and that's all she needs. That moment when she realizes that everything she's been through, all those years of manipulation, are finally over. I hear her question, addressed to Ryan, without her even looking at me. She shows him the photograph and asks, "Was it worth it?" Laura disappears through the door, her face drawn, but on his face, a dawn is breaking, the dawn of realization. Everything is collapsing. She asks her question again, standing at the threshold of her fate. Was it worth it? Her words sound like the last breath, and I feel the air in the room grow heavy, unbearable. She burns all her bridges to save her honor, but it's too late. This is her final act, her last attempt to maintain control, which had long since slipped away. And now, as they lead her away, her gaze is full of emptiness. I think of the children upstairs, about how their future is now safe. And that feeling, when I think of them, knowing that they will no longer be victims of her manipulation, it comforts me. All of this wasn't in vain. Megan and Grace are finally free from the chains that bound them. Megan, who had endured so much pain and betrayal, can now start anew. And Grace, who had always been by my side, but stayed in the shadows, is also free now. And this liberation, it's not just for them, but for me as well. We've all been part of this destructive path, but we've made it to the end, and now we can begin to rebuild everything that was destroyed. I think of William, and my heart tightens. He died trying to protect us. But his death wasn't in vain. It brought us here, to this moment, when the truth finally comes to light. And though his life was cruelly cut short, his efforts were not wasted. I connect the first camera to my laptop. The screen flickers to life, and suddenly I'm back there, where everything once seemed so simple and pure, as only youth and naivety can be. We're laughing. It's all in the past, but on the screen, Ryan is behind the camera, and I am in his arms, long before the world turned into a chessboard where we played by our own rules. Our last summer together, before college, before the choices, before we learned that love and lies could wear the same face. It was such a miracle, wasn't it? But then, as always, his gaze captures me. We all look at the frame, full of carefree moments and future hopes. Megan, sitting next to me, suddenly stops the picture, her voice cutting through the silence. Look! At that moment, the frame freezes, and I see us again, two young people exchanging some forgotten joke. We're laughing, forgetting everything that could spoil this moment. But suddenly, something strange catches my attention, Ryan's reflection in the window. He's standing there, next to us, but somehow outside of us, as if observing, absorbing, planning something. And in that moment, I realize, even then, in that carefree summer, he was already a step ahead, already building his plans that would later destroy everything we had. He watched as we built dreams, as we believed in our ideas, in the possibility that everything could be real, but in reality, he already knew it would all come crashing down. He was showing us who we would become. And who we already were. What do you mean? Megan interrupts my thoughts, her eyes full of confusion. You all always wanted adventures, but I always needed control. I look at her, and suddenly I remember that moment. That glance I hadn't noticed before. Ryan wasn't just the one who used us. He simply turned those truths we were hiding from each other into weapons. He knew us better than we ever thought. He knew what would happen to us, even before we realized that we were all just puppets in his game. Megan's coffee grows cold, untouched, just like her thoughts. I can't figure out the meaning of her silence. It's as if she knows that this moment is already gone, that nothing we've done matters anymore. We no longer believe what we see. The second camera remains dark, inactive, and in that moment, I realize that some truths, which I now understand, don't need to be seen to be understood. I raise my eyes from the screen and look at Megan. In this moment, we both understand that we've already made our choice. We both are already on the other side, where nothing remains to keep us from finally learning the whole truth. Now we choose, I say calmly, without emotion. There's no other way. But in her eyes, I see the same doubt that once existed in me. Her hand, which had remained still this whole time, now nervously tightens around the edges of her coffee cup. But I know she understands how we'll come to the end of this road, how there will be nothing left of our illusions. Only true faces, only those who survive will see the light. But that no longer matters. Time has passed. And, as William promised, all that's left is to find out what our next game will be.